Hello. Testing, testing. Can you hear me?
I
Okay, cool. Oh, there's the green box. Usually there's a green box when it hears you talking. I guess that's like who has the focus though.
hear a buzz as well.
Hello.
Sorry, what's that? I was looking through the docs here.
Oh, my mic was muted. Sorry, I was talking to myself. David and Max, how are you guys doing with the rain and flood?
I have not been flooded where I'm at, thankfully. How about you?
It's been okay here too. Yeah. I think you're muted also, Davis. I was hard muted.
Hello?
Hello.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, you're good.
Cool. I was just saying I have a leaky window, sadly, but other than that, nothing too serious.
Leaky window. The wind howling has been crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't sleep very well the other day.
Did
I
you
actually
guys-
like the sound.
It's not just the wind, it's like all the things in the yard that's like clinking and
I see. Yeah.
Wind chimes on overdrive.
not mine.
Oh, they're wind chimes now, whatever they are or were.
Did you sabotage them? He's like,
No, I'm a good
Oops.
neighbor.
Oh, so there actually are wind chimes involved, eh?
Similar, like somewhat like a thing, chime like thing. Yeah. And it's
Something
like,
that turns wind into sound. There you go.
yeah.
I see you're not being very specific, Rita, but
Wow,
there's-
full agenda today.
Is that your hint that we should get off of your wind chime topic?
No, it's not mine.
I think definitely something happened to those wind chimes.
No, no, people just have all kinds of weird stuff in their yard. Silly people.
Oh yeah, we can like do the meeting minutes.
Okay, let's move to the meeting, I guess. Okay, first one is JDIP with the pub sub solution.
Yeah. Should I take it forward? Hello.
Go for it.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, feel free to
Okay.
share your screen. Yeah.
Oh, my Zoom froze. I don't know how to share my screen anymore because I'm not seeing any.
Oh,
Oh, there
maybe.
it is. There it is.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So this, I have been working on this for like a couple of weeks now. So the problem that we were facing is basically right now we are reporting violations on constraint, and it has a limit of 500 violations. And beyond that, if anyone has to look at violations, they basically have to scan the logs to do it. So this is one potential solution, which is a PubSub solution where we, alongside a logging violation, we can also publish it to a particular channel from which any subscriber can look at it if they want to. So this document basically describes how would we achieve that. So in this document, I am discussing how to do it with Dapper, but I have looked at another other PubSub tools as well. And the approach remains the same, more or less, for all of the PubSub tools that I looked at, which is CubeMQ, Nets, or Knative Eventing. So on a higher level approach, we just install any operator. In case of Dapper, it's Dapper operator, otherwise like CubeMQ operator or Nets operator to set up the environment. Then we need a data store. Some of the tools uses in-memory data store that are available out of the box. Dapper has many options to choose from. I'm discussing using Redis in this document, but we have many options. Then there are some tool specific requirements. In case of Dapper, we need to label the deployment that we want to be included in the PubSub. Let's say in our case, it would be audit log. In other tools, it might not be a requirement. And then all the tools have relative libraries through which we can send out create a channel and make publisher publish to that channel and make subscriber get the messages from that channel. And that API code also remains the same. First step is create the channel, second one is publish to it, and then from the subscriber side, when we have predefined channel, just subscribe to that channel and they will get those violations. So that is the higher level approach, and this is like more implementation details. Well, in Dapper's case, we need some in any PubSub case, we need some predefined dependencies to be installed in the cluster. Yeah, and this just discusses higher level things, implementation details, and then there is a comparison. So my recommendation was that we go ahead with the Dapper, but I wanted to discuss if you guys have any thoughts on this doc. You guys have any PubSub tools that are more preferred for this solution? Then feel free to let those suggestions out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with the space, so I don't have like concrete suggestions, but I do think that one thing we should probably do is figure out like the most popular queuing services and make sure that, you know, we have as best coverage as we can, right? So like Amazon, Azure, GCP, all the major cloud providers. I don't know if RabbitMQ is still a popular open source thing or not. You know, Kafka, I think, is mentioned in here, and you know, whatever other open source projects have a decent amount of traction, and just, you know, double check that, you know, their protocols are covered.
Yeah. Dapper also supports like multiple underlying protocols to communicate, and it has MTLS as well. So like
Right. What I'm saying is, like, as things stand today, right? If we were to implement Dapper, and someone's like, "Well, I use Amazon's SQS, is that what they call it? And Dapper doesn't work with SQS, therefore I can't use your thing on my Amazon cloud."
Okay.
That would be a bad situation if
Yeah.
Amazon SQS had a lot of market share. So just looking at like the state of the art right now, what would be the trade-offs? It might be fine. Like I said, I have like no context. Dapper seems to me kind of like the
Could you scroll down to that chart?
Sorry.
Could you scroll down to that comparison chart?
This.
I pasted a link, by the way. I think those are the supported brokers. Yeah, it looks like AWS ones get supported, GCP, and then Azure. And then also the things like Kafka, RabbitMQ, Redis, yeah. In this also includes NAT streaming, I think, which this was the other NATS thing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have experience using NATS, and that's why I suggested it earlier. And it's sort of a standalone installation, so we don't have to rely on, let's say, any cloud provider or something like that. So this would be like yet another component that would get installed with Gatekeeper. And being like natively written in Go and all, like I found it to be performant in the past.
But I think the thing with NATS is I think that's more like opinionated. It's just like one thing, versus like I think Dapper is more like open census, where there are like different adapters and you can like do different integrations.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, the brokers list is all the ones I'm aware of, but I don't know the market for pub sub queues. So if anyone is aware of like a glaring absence in the list, I would not necessarily be aware.
Do we need like integrations and other things for this one? Like I sort of thought like it would be just simple pub sub model for Gatekeeper to internally implement a feature, right?
But for any subscriber, they would have to implement the same interface as well, right? So let's say like we publish into a channel, that's our requirement. Like we can define that in order, like we will use particular platform as a message broker, but the subscriber thing have to sign or use the same library as well to subscribe to that channel as well.
And that's true probably for any of the solution that we would use here.
Yeah.
Right. So NATS has native SDK or like library in Go that you can use to consume it.
I think the concern though would be the protocol, right? Like these messaging queues don't necessarily have the same protocol for pushing messages. And if a user wants to like set up their own messaging queue because they have like some alerts dashboard or whatever, and they want to hook into it, rather than using Kubernetes events because those don't really scale. If we use something that's opinionated in protocol like the NATS thing, then it's sort of use NATS or don't use us, right? Which is a bad situation.
Underneath
stack. What's up?
Sorry, NATS underneath uses standard protocol, if I'm not wrong. I kind of forgot now, but let me check. The only reason I'm saying NATS is like it's super easy to use. That's why it's like literally like least overhead thing I've ever used in the pub sub model. By the way,
yeah, what makes me think, and I might be wrong about this, but that there's significant differences between the different queuing solutions is this list of pub sub brokers that Surtesh linked to. Like if you could support all pub sub brokers with a single driver, then you would only have like one supported state for all of these brokers, right?
Yeah, I think this is more similar to like open census, versus you can have like a Prometheus, or we can have like, I don't know, different like cloud storages and whatever, right? And you can have these adapters, versus you could just integrate Prometheus into the project, but then you only get Prometheus.
Yeah, so if the simplicity of what was the thing called that you were talking about, NATS, means that users can no longer use AWS SQS, then that would probably be a bad trade-off, for example.
I am not super familiar with NATS, but from what I look like, I'm not familiar with the use case that you mentioned. If somebody already has a message broker and they want to use the same or plug it in, how would any of the tool react to? But like I don't think on a base level, NATS or for that matter, any of the PubSub tool will have that restriction as long as it uses in-memory data store, right? Like if it's not dependent on any of the requirement of message broker, like it's just in memory. So when there is a, like, as long as the messages are getting out of it, that in memory, we know for sure that the resources of that internal memory store will not exceed a certain limit as well. And since it's not using any underlying message broker as well, it's compatible with any other Kubernetes version as well, right? Does it
So
make sense?
not really. So let's say I want to send a message to RabbitMQ, right? RabbitMQ has some wire protocol, right, where it's like, I expect it to be formatted in this way. Here's how you handshake with me, blah, blah, blah. Now let's say I want to send a message to Redis.
Yeah.
Is that wire protocol and that authentication method, are they identical, right? If not, then you're pigeonholed into using a particular technology for the queue side by your choice of your library at the client side, unless you have something like this Dapper translation layer.
That is true.
Yeah. So that was mostly my concern, rather than the internal details of how these things function.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Hey, this is Alex. I have a quick question. So this looks good to me. I think it solves an important problem. I think I'm just trying to understand context. So, question for everyone that's been here longer than I have. Is this like the right solution to this problem, or like have you all considered any other alternatives to like only being able to display, n equals 500 violations for the constraint?
Sorry, the last part was a bit slurred for me. Any what violations for a constraint?
N equals 500, like whatever the n is.
Oh, increase n?
No, I'm just saying, like, have there been discussions about other solutions besides like a PubSub integration?
Yeah, we support a few today. We have the CRD, right? So that the violations are based on the CRD. But then that's the motivation with this design doc at the top is basically we are limited to the etcd limit, which is like a 1-ish megabyte. So we can only write until that much. And then the other thing is that we support today are the emitting logs. But then somebody will need to parse the logs. So that's the other thing that's supported. We also have the metrics, but those are not specific enough. You can say like number of violations, but you don't know what's being violated and stuff.
And we have Kubernetes events, but those get throttled and therefore are lossy. And yeah, I got you, Rita.
We went through a few iterations of this.
And there's also that proposal from, I forget what the SIG is called, SIG policy, the
working group policy. Yeah.
It's a working group. Sorry.
Yeah.
Where it's there's a CRD for reporting audit results, but there's the same concern there as there is with reporting results on an individual constraint. I mean, slightly different because there's, you can redesign the schema to avoid the per resource scaling, but then there's other scaling issues.
Yeah, I think for that to work, we'll need to have like sharding. Then that's a whole different issue.
Like sharding the API server and using a different storage backend.
No, I mean the sharding, like the CRDs, for example, like how the network slices does that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even if we sharded the API server, or sorry, the resource at CD storage for something like this seems kind of expensive. So probably a specialized storage backend that scales more cheaply and maybe is a little bit more secure would be nice. Anyway, so those are the various ranges of solutions that people have come up with, and different users probably have different preferences for which fits best.
Yeah, I think if you're doing like a larger scale thing, you're either logs or this is the solution. But obviously, log parsing is complicated.
Yeah, I'm not going to like look through this design doc now, but one thought I have is, do we want / need to batch these events, or do we suspect that there's high enough bandwidth that there's no need to try to do some load mitigation? I'm less concerned with audit results and more concerned with if we report like webhook level violations to the queuing service. You basically are doubling the web traffic, right? Unless you're batching and sending like every 5th result or every 10 seconds publish, or whatever the model is for slicing the batches.
Does Dapper have batching?
So one way to like, it doesn't have internal batching, but we can certainly serialize the array of JSON object and send it in a one go. But I have seen some PRs that are up that will introduce batching in future for Dapper, or at least there are like issues or PR. I saw something, I don't have the number, but I did see it in the Dapper GitHub repo. I'll link it later if I find one. But we can do it certainly with serializing multiple JSON objects into one and then deserialize it.
Yeah,
from the subscriber side.
This is going to be a fairly detailed, intensive discussion, probably that maybe only you have the background to do intelligently right now. But it's, yeah, figuring out the load scaling thing could be interesting. And
Yeah.
if they have plans to do stuff just natively, maybe we don't want to interfere with that. Maybe we do. I don't know.
Yes, I'll just make some notes over here.
Because the problem with if we try to take over batching, then is that the consumer will need to unpack our batches as well.
And what are the next steps here then? Should we start?
I had a comment in the doc. I don't know if we talk about it. I think the doc is written right now. It's almost like saying we're adding like whatever the thing we pick, like let's say Dapper, right? It's almost like saying we're going to add Dapper's stuff to audit and expecting annotations, like Dapper annotations on the pod. Like I wonder if we could make this more generic so that it, if we decide to add other support for other pub sub solutions, it wouldn't be hard.
I think implicit in that is, do we trust Dapper to follow through on its mission to be the abstraction layer for other messaging queues or not?
Yeah. Like you wrote this whole comparison thing, right? Like things change all the time, right? So let's say in the future, some other solution is better for whatever reason. you know, can we write this such that it's easily extensible? And I linked the thing that
Yeah.
Max added a while back for the metrics exporter. So similar idea, right? Where you don't like lock. I mean, you could have a default one. Actually, this is not even default, right? Because this is like there's a flag for it, right? But yeah, I really don't. I wouldn't want like Dapper logic to be in the audit code. Is what I'm saying.
So
Yeah.
basically, you want like an isolation layer
Yep.
that we call our interface, and
Yep.
then somewhere else that translates into a Dapper sequence. And
Yep.
maybe there's like an interface defined where users, if they want to fork and add their own thing, it's pretty easy to do. They only like, they
Yeah.
don't even maybe need to touch a file, or maybe at most one file.
Right. Same again. Same with the metrics exporter idea.
I like for the PubSub tools that I looked at, the approach is for the publishing or creating channel, it's same set of sequences. Like you create a channel, you publish to it, just the different imports of libraries and function names. So I think it should be technically possible to create a common interface that provides an abstraction so that like any of the tools that is supported, but still the dependency on installing particular operator or environment for any particular PubSub tool is there, and I don't know how to abstract that as well. Like we can't.
Yeah, as I added to my comment, right? I think we can have docs for how to do it, but I don't think we should add.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise it's gonna be too much to support.
Yeah, but so I think interfacing and making it abstract makes sense, and it is possible as well. But I would need to also do some digging on that part to be sure.
Gotcha. So for example, like the annotations, do they have to be, does Dapper require the annotation to be there?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because what Dapper does is it injects a sidecar, and that sidecar is responsible for connecting the exporting mechanism to the message broker, so we don't have to do it. I think at least that's what I understood from reading on why it needs those labels. So it may include it into the publishing queue, and that's why like any other CubeMQ did not have that requirement, nor did Nats, but Dapper did. So it's different for every PubSub tool as well.
Got it.
So looks like I have to make note of three things. One is batching and load capacity. Another one is if there are any popular message broker that is not supported by Dapper. And the third one is how much work would it require to make it generic, or even if it's possible or not. Am I missing anything from the
Yeah,
discussion?
for generic, you can take a look at like how the metrics is structured, so that's more like defined generically. One comment: do we want to do it outside of audit also, like in webhook? So today, I think we have like log denies. Would we want to publish using PubSub in a similar way?
In principle, yes. In practice, I think audit is a good MVP. Particularly if the batching thing, it turns out that it's a work in progress on Dapper's side. I'm not saying that it's definitely blocking, to be clear. I'm just saying that I could see webhooks being more complex, so we should, as we look into it, like be aware of that and be open to having like a phased rollout.
Yeah, I'm totally okay with starting with toilets. Yeah, but it sounds like in the future we can extend to webhook too.
Yeah.
And as far as the next steps, are we okay with the starting implementation?
I mean, barring the sort of like, due diligence, but and like actually looking at the doc, like I would like some time to give the doc a close read just in case. Because otherwise I have just this meeting's worth of time with it.
Can I also suggest that in the future, like, if possible, we could share the docs before the meeting, like maybe a couple of days in advance? At least on Slack, just so people don't,
Yeah,
give people time, yeah.
I should have
Yeah.
done that in this one as well. Sorry.
I mean, if people want to discuss it in 2 meetings too, that's fine. Like, I don't think it was we were not able to have a useful discussion on the doc. I just don't think I can give a detailed one, if that makes sense.
Reaching consensus in one meeting, that's the dream, right?
Yeah, I added to next meeting to revisit.
Also, I like that for the agenda, everyone kept adding on top as opposed to adding on bottom. Sneaky.
Oh, I think I changed some of the stuff. I moved some of the thing to be
Well, last week we said we're gonna revisit the per process enforcement action thing.
Yeah.
That was the only thing on there. And then things just, I don't know, maybe somebody moved it. Yeah, you're right. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we got the other ones out of the way. So I moved that to the later on. Yeah, that was me.
Oh, okay. Should we move to the next one since we have a lot and it's only like, it's already midpoint?
Yeah, looks like oh no, we have a gatekeeper library one. Is that from you?
I guess this is for me.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, I think this just came up because we had like a bad policy that got merged in library, and I can totally see that will continue to happen. It's possible, right? So how do we like mark a policy as bad or deprecated? This is the library. Yeah.
Sorry, what made this thing bad? What happened? Requires sync annotation allows.
I think it was like a typo or something.
Oh, okay. There was like a critical bug
Yeah.
in it wasn't that the policy was a bad idea or fundamentally.
Well, no,
flawed.
it was a new, it
And
was
we
like a new thing that we added, but nobody's using it, right? But
Oh, the annotation. Okay, so this is the requires sync annotation.
That's
and We're
right.
changing the schema of the annotation, and how do we signify?
right.
Oh, okay. This is not the pod disruption budget one, right? That's also
No,
brought to
no,
CI.
no, this is different. This is the requiring, like you annotate what objects you want to sync, and then, and then in Gatekeeper will validate that, right? But there was like a typo. Again, there's nothing wrong with this particular policy at the moment, but it just kind of got me thinking in the future, if there's a bad policy that gets merged, how do we mark it as deprecated? Or
Can we have a annotation like with deprecated true or something like that?
Next to the version?
Yeah, like just like we do with the metadata. So metadata gatekeeper SH deprecated through, I don't know, something like that.
That's definitely good for like bad singular policy. What's I think interesting, and I'm not sure whether you meant to do this or not, Rita, but like this example, there's like a new syntax that we're trying to leverage. So we like backfilled all policies with something using that syntax, and now that syntax is changing. And so like there's almost like a global library version that where if you were to have a new, if Gatekeeper were ever, to ever leverage this annotation, because it doesn't currently, it basically it would, you would need to put like, you need to have that a version of the library at least this minimum level to use this feature. Although I'm not sure that.
That's another problem, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if that needs to be, because we failed probably gracefully, right? We say cannot parse, but here's your constraint template and constraint installed anyway. So, you know, look at the status, fix it however you want, add the sync, look for an upgrade, that kind of thing. So that problem might solve itself, because it's just like any other buggy software.
That's a separate problem, which I think we talked about in the past, which is like, how do you require minimum of gatekeeper? That's a different problem, right? Whereas this is just, how do we let people know that for whatever reason, this particular policy is now no longer supported?
Yeah, I like for specific policies the annotation idea. Although, honestly, like the existence of a higher version should also be a clue that there's maybe changes you're interested in, right? Like it's because we have new versions of Gatekeeper doesn't mean that the old versions of Gatekeeper are necessarily bad. I think there have been instances where there've been like critical bugs where we're like, hey, this particular release, please don't use it. And what we've done is put a
that's in the release note.
in the release note. Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't have any formal like backward compatibility or version supported version for library.
Yeah. Well, we have the versioning schema, right? We have so there's a bit of backwards compatibility, right, in our definition of major, minor, and pad.
Sure, but we don't talk about like, you know, n minus whatever is supported or anything like that.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting we should. I'm just saying we don't have one.
Right. And honestly, I think we shouldn't really support anything other than the latest version for policies. Just because that would be a whole kettle of fish, and I'm not sure there's any reason to try. But
yeah, that's a good point though. I think we should have a doc for this, like the support policy for these things.
Right. So support policy, but also some way to tell people this is, you know, don't use this version, for example.
Yeah. But I, as I said, I like the annotation idea for that.
Okay. I'll open a PR for that, and then we'll go from there. Sounds
So
good?
you are going to mark the older one as deprecated?
Yeah. I'll just do one PR and then we can discuss in the PR.
Yeah, bike shit on the
Yeah, on the name, I'm sure. But I think we can start with that one, just, and then we can put that in the README and the, just to tell people, you know, look for this. Does that sound okay? Yeah, okay. Okay, next. Forking, my favorite.
Yeah, so
No,
hey,
I'm
this is
just
Alex.
kidding.
Could we actually skip this and go to the more interesting one? I think we can talk about this some more in GitHub comments, but I'd love to use the rest of the time to just talk about the, yeah. And to be clear, I was talking about the per process enforcement action. I'm looking at the
Mhm.
Okay.
list here.
Do we want to also talk quickly about the library thing, just so since we're in the library discussion?
Which discussion?
So the next one after Alex's one, handling deprecated removed API versions in library. Since we are
Yeah.
talking about the support, right? Since these are removed, like there is no ingress in
Oh,
extensions v1 beta 1. So this is going
sure.
to cause errors in Gatekeeper because it's just those APIs will not exist. So when Gatekeeper, the sync watches those APIs, I think we're getting errors for those. So for the library support, do we want to support for the known Kubernetes versions? Because some of these are long, like removed.
So I think one, the point of having that annotation that we were just talking about, not the deprecated annotation, but the syncs or required annotation, is that is intended to be sort of version agnostic. That's saying like this policy requires some version of network policy. Here are the versions we know about. Pick any of them. Some version of pods or whatever. Right. So in terms of configuring the sync, that should be the source of truth, right? Because there's going to be non-overlapping version skew, particularly if their K8s deprecates, which I think they're moving away from, but even so. The second thing is my understanding of the library stuff. The sync.yaml there is purely for example, and I think we also use it for end-to-end testing.
Right.
Right. So I think we only really care about supporting the range of clusters that we want to use for end-to-end testing. And if users want to have some flexibility in terms of like what they're syncing, the annotation really would be where they could get that from, because that's also going to give the like data density of what objects are equivalent, right? That networking v1 and v2 are the same thing, and if resources move across groups, which they have in the past, that kind of thing. Which a single sync that only lists out the versions to be synced doesn't really give you that information. Does that make sense?
Sort of, I think.
I don't know if sync in library, at least I don't, like, I'm not sure if it's clear to users that sync in library is meant just for a demonstration purpose.
Yeah.
Which is
Examples.
Sorry, that's fair. Go ahead, though.
Sorry, like, because there's a folder for examples, so that seems like it's for demonstration purpose, but like everything else, like, template and constraints and sync, like they're all together actually, right?
Yeah, I don't know why sync isn't in samples, to be honest.
Well, it's not an example if it's required, right? Like, for example, the earlier PR, the earlier policy we were talking about, where you would need to sync some of the resources in order to actually use the policy. In that case, it's actually not an example, right? It's actually a must.
Yeah, it's a requirement.
Well,
I mean, go ahead, please.
So the template library, right, is for consuming templates, right? It's not necessarily meant, in my view, to be like you install this and you have a fully functioning policy schema. Like there's a place for that kind of thing, but that's not template library. That's like constraint library or actual like policy library stuff. So the I don't think it's necessarily true that you have this template and you have this sync YAML, and you're supposed to apply both of those. And further, if that is our model for how users should consume this, it's broken because of this version skew thing that Surtesh is talking about, right? Like, we don't want to sync network policies 10 times because there's 10 versions of network policy, right? We want to sync the minimum amount of resources that are necessary to enforce policy, right? So we're not like expending memory unnecessarily. Unfortunately, that's kind of a hard problem because it doesn't just matter like what version of Kubernetes you have, where, oh, this version isn't available in this version of K8s, but this other resource version is. It also depends on the set of templates that you have, right? Like, you could have a template that supports, sorry, I'm just going to keep using network policy as network policy v1 and v2. And then you have this homegrown template that only supports v1, right? And if you, the smart thing, right, is like just use the latest version because that's the latest version, except not, because then you could have used v1 and only had one sync for network policy instead of two. So what the annotation does is it, as I said, establishes equivalency groups, right? So it says, I need at least one network policy. I don't care if it's v1, v2, v3, but I need at least one of these in order to do my job. And I need at least one of pods, v1, 2, or 3, in order to do my job. I don't care which.
I mean, can we just rely on the annotation then? Do we need the sync? Can we just automate that, right?
That's the end game, right? Is to either have something that can ingest these annotations and do the derivation for you, hopefully shift left so you can like actually statically analyze all the templates next to each other. Or
that still requires a template to be updated with the template authors.
Yes, it requires the annotation to exist and to be accurate.
But also, I guess for ingress, we don't care because, say, it moved from extensions to networking, right?
Well, you would be able to, because whether that matters or not for the template depends on if you program the rego.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so the annotation lets you communicate how you've programmed the rego. To say, yes, I'm aware that we've moved it from extensions. So
and also like, annotations can change, right? Depending on how the operator wants to do this. Like this is just a reference, right? It's not the actual thing.
Yeah.
So should we, okay, so since we're talking about the support doc, right? Like then should we also add, here are the things that are supported and mainly the regos, I guess just the regos. Yeah, everything else is just, it's a reference.
But only the latest version of the rego.
Only the latest version of the rego, yeah. Well, I guess constraint template, to be exact. Yeah. Okay. I think that's reasonable. And it's good that we're talking about it so we have it documented, because there's no way users would know this, right?
I could think of, one exception to the latest.
Okay.
The latest of every major version, right? Because if you change major versions, you change interfaces. That could be hard for users to
to move. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the last one.
Okay. Maybe I can share my screen for this one. It'll be easier.
I did ask some comments last night, but I don't know if people saw it.
Yeah, I haven't looked at this in a while.
Oh yeah, I had questions. So first of all, like there's so many options. Which one are we kind of, have we like talked about?
Yeah. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we finalized on that one.
Okay.
I do like this, the last one. This seems like pretty good, like logically to me.
I do not think that works with the cell cap.
Yeah, so I think we need to discuss like how that works. I think Alex had a comment here too.
And yeah,
Well,
I
which
did.
option is the closest to it? 4?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Where's 4? Okay.
Can you just help me understand, is it enforcement action at the constraint level, or it's per action?
Is enforcement action at the constraint level or per action? Can you?
Oh, sorry. My bad. I meant, is the namespace exclusion at the constraint level or action level?
Is this
Because the
for
thing that
proposal
started this whole
5
thing.
or 4? Is this? Are we talking about option 5 or 4 right now?
Option 4. I mean, it's a question for both, but since we're talking about 4.
Yeah, I think we said we need to add the excluded namespaces here. Is this it? I think you added this, Max.
But that looks global, like that's not per action.
Right. So for number 4, for option 4, if you wanted to take a different action for a different namespace for the same enforcement point, you would have 2 constraints. Right. You would have a constraint that applies to every namespace, but the namespace that's special.
Yeah.
And then you would have a second identical constraint that only targets the special namespace.
And option 5 basically removes that, so it can only be one constraint.
I don't think it. I think option 5 is actually harder, in addition to breaking the cell cap. But yeah, so you have multiple matches. Yeah, so you do at that point avoid copying the parameters. That is true.
Yeah, so this one is multiple. Yeah, so there's a match and then there's an exclude namespace. So that's per action or per multi-action.
That doesn't look like per action. None of this looks like per action.
I mean, this is a per action, right? This is an action, and then you can have a match with an excluded namespaces.
But excluded namespace is not under action though, right? It's above that.
No, but this is a different action, so it would be like it would the match would be here, right? And excluded namespaces would be here.
Actually, this could match to the cell cap. Sorry, because the concern with the cell cap is, well, maybe it could. I shouldn't have spoken so quickly, but the concern with the cell cap is if you need to know the resource under test, like the contents of it, before you know what actions to take, that could be a problem, because the sort of the compatibility model we're aiming for right now is if you have a constraint and a template, you can basically translate those into the primitives that the cell cap wants, right? At the time the constraint and template are created, right? And in order to do that, you need to know like what actions are going to be taken regardless of the input, right? So as long as it's like possible to statically analyze the set, right, and translate it into one or more instances of these cell cap primitives, that can be done. But if it's like, oh, based on if the resource looks like this, it should go to the webhook because we're taking this special enforcement action. But if the resource looks like that, it should go to the cell cap because that's a better, like more robust execution model and it supports all those actions. Like that decision we cannot make because sort of by definition, if we're leveraging the cell cap, we're trying to take ourselves um, out of the logical pathway of runtime for evaluating that constraint. Does that make sense? So match and action, like I think those just like devolve into multiple constraints anyway. So that's probably fine.
Why is
Go
it
ahead.
okay to have multiple constraints here? Wouldn't that make it harder to know which namespace to exclude for a given action?
What do you mean by multiple constraints?
Oh, like if you want to have exclude different namespaces for different actions, you would have to create two different constraints.
Are we looking at option 4 or 5? I thought we were looking at 5.
I'm just responding to Max's
Oh,
comment about multiple constraints.
So option 5 is equivalent to having multiple constraints in one constraint, right? At the
Okay.
cost of changing how constraints are written. So if the way option 5 reads is if you want to have 10 constraints that have the same parameter set, you would just have 10 entries in this enforcement field. In option 4, what you would have is 10 separate constraints that have the same parameters. So option 5 is more denormalized at the cost of it, like looks a little bit more complex in terms of its schema, right? You would probably have more boilerplate if you didn't care about this feature and you're just like, I just want to write a constraint, use the default enforcement action everywhere. You've added this enforcement indentation now matches an item in the list. So it gets a little bit more fiddly. But as I said, if you do want the advanced features, you're not repeating yourself by creating multiple constraints. I think there's an implicit question here of at what level do constraints and constraint templates do we stop trying to treat them as the dehydrated source of truth? What I mean by that is it's bad to like copy and paste code, right? Because people like will forget. Right. So the notion is, well, you should not do that. And the one model is to, like option 5, write your syntax such that users can do that. The problem with that is that when you bake in a certain denormalization into your syntax, you can also foreclose like other ways of coordinating resources, right? Because you've sort of taken it on yourself to tell the user how this should behave. So another option would be to say, well, now we're middleware, right? And if you want to denormalized. Really what you should have is your source of truth should be over here, and then it will spit out duplicated resources that will consume, right? This is kind of like GitOps. If you have multiple Kubernetes clusters, you define your thing once, and then you have your pipelines spew out whatever appropriate config in the various clusters. I think the salient difference here is, yeah, this is always going to be touchy because it's not, it's vague and there's a lot of variables, but there's, I got a package. There's, you could imagine coordinating enforcement action as part of a rollout, right? This would let you do that by like rewriting the constraint. So that option 5 would let you do that by rewriting the constraint. Option 4 would let you do that by adding or removing constraints as necessary. I'm not going to, in the -3 minutes, like unpack the
Yeah,
implications of that.
given that we're at time, can I request that whoever wrote option 4 and 5, can y'all like add a bit more, like a bit more to the example? Just so
What
that
are you
we,
looking for?
I don't know,
For-
like
for a
the
bit more?
to-dos, right? The to-dos, like just so that we can see what you're envisioning, and then we can come back next week.
Yeah, I think these are misleading because we are doing this, but I'm also very confused about what are the possible actions and then what are possible enforcement points and excluded enforcement points.
Yeah, so can we add more examples, and then also take time to look at the cell cap a bit more? That way, next week when we come back together, hopefully we'll have more intelligent conversation.
Yeah, I think Alex had a comment here too for the what is the issue exactly.
Does that sound
yeah.
good? Sorry.
The issue is the first part of what I said a while back, just to be clear. I think that's clear. The other thing I heard is, what are the enforcement points? We don't know, right? Someone could write a consumer of the constraint framework we have no idea about. That's part of the challenge of this.
And I mean, like, what would be the enforcement points today?
That we know of. Oh, good.
Sorry, go ahead.
That we know of, there's webhook, there's audit, there's Gator.
So I think if you can write it down, that makes it like, what are the possible ones, like in, I don't know, here, like possible values are these. So I think that would make it easier.
Well, but the point is the possible values are unbounded, right? Like there's
possible values today, right? And then it's for future, yes, they can be extensible, but I think it would
even today they're unbounded. Like there's for SETI config validator, which is nothing anyone here like works on, but it exists and it is an enforcement point. Does that make sense? Like
so you said audit and then Gator, what, webhook, right?
Yeah, and then arbitrary someone somewhere could have written something that we would have no way of knowing. So that's my point, is like it's a priority today that we don't want to assume we know all the enforcement points that are out there.
Okay, well, let's just tag people in the doc, and so we could, discuss asyncly and then come back to this next week. Sound good?
Max, would you be okay with adding an example of this? Like, how would it be used?
How would which be used?
Like for option 5, just like an example. I think this one is a good one, but I think we just need more context on like the like what values we have today, what are the issues with like the future values, or how would we even know about the enforcement points, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think I've talked about this before. I could add some stuff around that for sure, some thoughts around that.
And I think if it would help if we just focused on like one option, maybe.
I did option 4. I'm not sure. I think you may have written option 5.
Oh no, I think you did option 5.
I did.
I did
Okay.
1 to 3. I think you added 4 and 5. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine if you want to focus on 4. But then maybe let's just, because there's quite a few options here.
Yeah. Yeah. 4 is my preferred one. I could add examples for both. Sorry, I thought that someone had taken 4 and transformed it into 5. It's been a while.
Yeah. Okay, let's revisit this in the next one, and then we can talk asynchrony in the doc.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.